Most people hear the phrase zero trust and assume it means treating everyone like a threat. It sounds extreme, suspicious, almost dystopian. The name alone makes it feel like security has decided to distrust its own users. But zero trust isn't about assuming employees are malicious or that customers can't be trusted. It's about recognizing that the way we used to grant trust in digital systems was built for a different era. It's not a philosophy rooted in fear. It's a response to how modern infrastructure actually works.
BreachBytes TV.
For decades, security operated under what's often called the castle and moat model. The corporate network was the castle. Firewalls formed the walls. VPN access acted as the drawbridge. Once you were inside, you were treated as trusted. Employees worked in centralized offices. Servers lived in controlled data centers. Most traffic flowed through predictable pathways. The idea that inside equals safe wasn't perfect, but it was manageable because the environment was relatively contained. But then everything changed. Cloud computing moved critical systems outside the traditional perimeter. Employees began working remotely on personal and managed devices. Applications stopped being hosted in one location and instead spread across multiple cloud providers. Data started flowing between SaaS platforms, APIs, and third-party integrations. The network stopped being a boundary, became just another transport layer. At the same time, attackers stopped trying to batter down the walls. Instead of attacking infrastructure directly, they targeted identity. Phishing campaigns became more refined. Credential stuffing leveraged password reuse. Session tokens were hijacked. If an attacker could log in with valid credentials, they didn't look like an outsider. They looked like a legitimate user. And under the traditional model, once that login succeeded, trust was granted broadly and often silently. Imagine a real-world scenario. Employee falls for a convincing phishing page and unknowingly provides credentials. The attacker logs in successfully. Under the old model, that login might grant access to shared drives, internal dashboards, collaboration tools, and sensitive data. There may be logging, but unless something appears dramatically abnormal, the access continues. The system does exactly what it was designed to do. It trusts the login. Zero trust emerged as a recognition that this trust model was too brittle. When trust is granted primarily at the moment of authentication and rarely revisited, a single compromised identity can become a gateway to widespread damage. Zero trust changes the question from, "Are you authenticated?" to, "Should this request be allowed under these exact conditions?" That shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of assuming that authentication equals authorization everywhere, zero trust evaluates context continuously. Is the device managed and compliant? Is the login location consistent with prior behavior? Is the user suddenly requesting access to data they've never accessed before? Is privilege escalation happening outside of a standard workflow? Access becomes conditional, not assumed. This doesn't mean users are constantly interrupted. Modern zero-trust systems aim to make verification proportional to risk. If everything about a request aligns with historical patterns, same device, same geography, same type of access, the experience may feel seamless. But if risk signals change, additional friction appears. Maybe that means step-up authentication. Maybe it means temporary access approval. Maybe it means blocking the request entirely. The goal isn't maximum restriction, it's intelligent verification. One of the most important components of zero trust is segmentation. In older network environments, once someone was inside, lateral movement was often too easy. Compromised account could explore internal systems with minimal resistance. That's how small breaches escalated into major incidents. Zero trust assumes compromise is possible, so it limits how far any single identity can travel. Permissions are narrowly defined. Access to sensitive systems requires explicit authorization. The blast radius is intentionally constrained. The phrase "assume breach" is central here. It doesn't mean giving up on prevention. It means acknowledging that prevention alone is not sufficient. Credentials will be phished. Devices will be lost. Vulnerabilities will exist. If your entire security posture depends on stopping every initial compromise, eventually it will fail. Zero trust asks a different question. When something fails, how contained is the damage? Consider how this plays out in practice. Under a zero trust approach, a compromised user account might still allow limited access to email. But attempts to access administrative controls, financial systems, or large-scale data exports would trigger additional validation. Network segmentation would prevent that same account from scanning internal servers. Short session lifetimes would require re-verification periodically. Instead of unrestricted movement, the attacker encounters checkpoints. Another misconception is that zero trust is a product you can buy. It isn't. It's an architectural philosophy. You can buy tools that support it, identity providers, endpoint management platforms, conditional access systems, but zero trust itself is about how those tools are configured and how decisions are made. It requires organizations to rethink access models, privilege structures, and monitoring practices. It requires ongoing governance, not just installation. It also requires cultural alignment. Historically, broad access was often granted for convenience. It reduced friction and minimized support tickets. But broad access increases risk exposure. Zero trust demands discipline, least privilege access. Regular reviews, temporary elevation instead of permanent rights. These changes can feel restrictive at first, but they create resilience over time. If you connect this to the themes we've explored throughout this series, the pattern becomes clear. Passwords fail because they're reused. Two-factor authentication isn't always enough, because sessions can be relayed or hijacked. Account takeovers unfold because systems extend trust too far after login. Identity is fragile because it's represented by signals. Convenience reduces friction in ways that expand attack surface. Zero trust is the structural response to those accumulated realities. It's not about distrusting people. It's about distrusting assumptions. It's the assumption that being on the internal network means safe. The assumption that a successful login guarantees legitimacy. The assumption that access granted once should remain valid indefinitely. Zero trust replaces those assumptions with verification. Not constant suspicion, but continuous evaluation. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is that zero trust isn't extreme. It's simply aligned with how the internet now operates. In a world of distributed infrastructure, cloud-native applications, and portable identity, static trust models are outdated. The perimeter is gone. Identity is central. Context matters. Zero trust reflects that shift. It accepts complexity rather than pretending simplicity still exists. Designs for resilience instead of betting on perfect prevention. It narrows blast radius instead of hoping compromise never happens. It is not paranoia. It is adaptation. One of the easiest ways to understand why zero trust became necessary is to look at how attackers behave after they get access to a system. Most breaches don't begin with catastrophic damage. They begin quietly. An attacker gains a foothold through a stolen password, a phished login, or a compromised session cookie. At that point, the attacker doesn't immediately try to destroy systems or steal massive amounts of data. Instead, they explore. They test what the account can access. They open dashboards, browse shared drives, look at internal documentation, and identify which systems appear valuable. This phase is often called reconnaissance, and it can last hours, days, or even weeks if nothing interrupts it. Under traditional trust models, this exploration often goes unnoticed because the activity technically looks legitimate. After all, the attacker is using a real account. They are logging in normally. They are clicking through applications just like any employee might. The security systems see authentication succeed and assume everything else must be fine. But what zero trust does differently is question whether each of those actions actually makes sense in context. If a user who normally accesses 2 internal tools suddenly begins probing 10 different systems, that behavior becomes meaningful. If a marketing employee suddenly attempts to access engineering documentation repositories, that request stands out. Instead of assuming every action after login is acceptable, zero trust evaluates each request against expected behavior patterns. This dramatically changes how far attackers can move inside an environment. In many historical breaches, the real damage happened after the initial compromise. Attackers used one compromised account to discover additional credentials, to escalate privileges, and gradually gain administrative control. By the time defenders noticed something was wrong, the attacker had already moved through multiple systems and collected large amounts of data. Zero trust intentionally disrupts that chain reaction. By limiting lateral movement and constantly re-evaluating access, it becomes much harder for an attacker to turn a single stolen login into a full-scale breach. If this breakdown helped clarify what zero trust really means beyond the buzzwords, consider subscribing. This channel explores how cybersecurity evolves in response to real-world failure patterns, not marketing narratives. We're unpacking the architecture, the psychology, and the system design decisions shaping digital risk today. And as we continue, we'll keep building on how trust, identity, and resilience intersect. See you in the next one.